I'm not here to tell you what we're going to face. I'm not here to predict anything. I'm not going to tell you that somebody in this church is going to get shot, but I'm not going to be surprised if it happens. I'm not going to tell you that there couldn't be some kind of a catastrophic event that could affect people that either we love or affect somebody in this church in this area. I'm not going to tell you or predict that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen. Because this is the world that we are living in. We are not living in the same world even from 10 years ago. The fact that we have been able to vote in the kind of administration that we have now is staggering. Our forefathers would have rolled over in their grave. The things that are coming down the pike as far as laws for morality or immorality. The fact that we in Washington and Colorado voted in same-sex marriage, and that we are allowing pot to be smoked by the ounce. The law enforcement is all up in arms because how do you regulate that? So here what we did, this shows how brilliant that our politicians are. We voted in a law. We gave people the right and the opportunity to vote in a law that we didn't have any idea how we would implement. But it's the law. So now we can have people smoking pot, and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon here in the state of Washington. Even California, businesses in California are trying to figure out ways that they can establish clubs in the state of Washington to set up dispensers I mean, really, okay? So they're going to leave there. They don't know how much pot is going to affect people when they drive, because pot has a different effect than alcohol. And what they have regulated is about the same as what it is going to be drunk. So what's going to happen? We're going to have tragedy. We're going to have difficulty. Some people are going to get killed because of the stupidity and throwing up the hands of people who have no common sense or morals at all. But it is what it is. That's the world we're living in. So where does that put us as God's people? Well, let's go back to Bible times. Where did it put Jesus and the disciples? Where did it put the pastors of those towns, those cities? In a Roman government that was evil. The immorality of Rome is very well known. Homosexuality, promiscuity, absolute immorality and indecency and open sexual sin, evil. But people got saved. And lives were changed. And they were transformed. And people stood fast in the Lord. So the challenge tonight is that in spite of the hand that we are dealt, in spite of the state, literally, that we are living in, not a state of mind, but I'm talking about the state of Washington. In spite of all the evil that is around us, we can and will stand fast in the Lord if we make some decisions. You young people are going to have to decide what kind of life you want to live. You're going to have to decide what kind of families that you want to raise. You're going to have to decide what kind of kids that you want to have. As a Christian, I've made those decisions. As a husband, as a wife, my wife and I, we've made those decisions. We don't, and you know, I feel for the young people today. You seniors, the gray-haired, the older, you've made those choices, you've lived your life, and this generation has got to take a stand now that we stood on years back. Paul is trying to encourage the Thessalonians, and he writes this. He says in verse 5, for this cause, knowing that there is going to be suffering, knowing that tribulation is going to come. And he says, even as it came to pass, so they had already experienced it, and he says, you know that it's going to continue. It's not going to change. It's not going to be different. We are not exempt, none of us in this room, or Christians who are outside, other people in our church, we are not exempt from these things. Just because we're saved. That's a myth. So he says, for this cause, knowing this, when I could no longer forbear. Verse 5, he says, I sent to know your faith. Instead of wondering anymore, I had to know. So he said, I sent to know your faith. I wanted to see, after being with you and establishing and working in your life, I wanted to see if you were still serving God. Wanted to see if you were still going at it. Lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. You know, the disciples got discouraged too. Men as great as the Apostle Paul. Men like Peter. Paul made statements. He gave snippets of it. Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. He listed different people who had failed. He also listed people who got back. John Mark. He was related to Barnabas. He was Barnabas' nephew. Barnabas says, we're going to take Mark. Paul says, no, we're not. Paul had silence. Barnabas says, well, yes, we are. He's my nephew. We're going. He says, no, we're not. He's a quitter. He's not profitable for the ministry. And we took him already once, and he went home. We're not taking him. Got heated. Good men got heated. Never heard anything more about Barnabas or John Mark. But the grace of God can change young people, can change things. And that young man who Paul refused to take on that missionary journey, later on Paul says, bring John Mark, because now he's profitable for the ministry. It was encouragement. When Larry called yesterday, and they told me they were going to be in town, and then we just got to visit with them and talk with them. What a blessing it was to be able to see how God, in the 3 years that they have been gone, how they still are serving God and what God is doing, and the blessing of the Lord upon their lives. That's what Paul, that's what he's saying in verse 8. Here's what he writes. He says in verse 8, for now we live if ye stand fast in the Lord. Do you know what he's saying? He's saying, in so many words, it's worth it all. All that I've invested, all that we are doing, all that we have put into your life, it's worth it to live and serve and preach and teach the Word of God, to know that you're faithful, to know you're staying in it, you're sticking by it, and you've not fallen out. You don't become a casualty. You know, Paul's life. Paul, his greatest fear was that he would fall. He said, I don't want to preach to others and I myself be a castaway. And so Paul is saying, I live to see people stand fast in the Lord. The word actually relates to warmth, meaning that there's no doubt that his heart was warmed when he heard back the news. They're still at it, Paul. Timothy comes back and he says, hey, they're still serving the Lord. And even in their difficulty, even with the persecution, even losing their lives, even with the afflictions and the trials, that come in the Christian life, Paul, they're still faithful. He writes in verse 7, he says, "Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all our affliction and distress by your faith." You see, Paul was going through difficulty too. Starting churches in that time was not any easier than it is now. We as a convention have started many churches in this area, and some are still going, but some aren't. Because the gospel is not as well received as it used to be. Church growth is way down in America right now. Churches, Larry said they have a town of 20,000 that they're in. They're out in the sticks. I mean, they're in the sticks. And he said that they have all these churches, and more are closing than are starting. In the Bible Belt. We're not talking about Washington State. We're talking about North Carolina. I mean, a place where there are so many churches in the South. For those of you who've never traveled, you've never gone to the South, you've never gone east, you've never gone down into Texas and Oklahoma and all these different places. It's a different world. You don't even have a concept of what church is like. My kids, when we moved to Washington 10 years ago, the first thing they said when we came across the border is, "Daddy, where are all the churches?" Because you couldn't drive 2 minutes and you'd see a church that would run 500, and then a block away, another church. Baptist churches. I'm not talking about Presbyterian and Methodist. I'm talking about Baptist churches everywhere. They're like you just took water and you poured water, and poof, they grew. Huge buildings and parking lots full and people going to church. But it's changing even there now. Things aren't the same, and there are a lot of our country, our nation, more than ever needs the gospel. In Seattle, the South right now has a great burden for where we are. Strategically, our church is in a particular place of the world in the Northwest, and our convention is looking to pour hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars into this convention. I'm talking about our local association. Because they know where it's darkest in the night, that the brighter the light. And so we need to keep we need to just keep on keeping on. I'm going to be challenging you young people and challenging all of us to be about inviting people, talking to people, getting people in these doors. We're going to look at rethinking and and strategizing and thinking about how we as a congregation can do more to get the gospel out, even beyond the knocking doors. We're going to continue doing that. We're going to continue to visit. We're going to do the biblical things and do all we can to get the gospel. We don't know how much time we have. But we know that we have a responsibility. We've been entrusted with the greatest message of all time. There's nothing that makes it more worthwhile to minister than to know that you stand fast in the Lord. Leave your finger there, and I'll give you one more cross-reference, because it wasn't just Paul who felt this way. The Apostle John also felt this way. I believe it's 2 John, if you'll turn. It's just before Jude. You have 1 John, 2 John, and then 3 John. It's 3 John. We're going to read beginning in verse 1, And we're going to read down through verse number 4. And I want you to listen to more. This is something that is a fact in ministry. Verse 1, he says, the elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, the elder, he's referring to himself, whom I love in the truth. Gaius, perhaps the man who was the pastor. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in truth, or in the truth. So, when the brethren came, they're bringing word. That meant that somebody had visited them, and they had gotten information, or they had seen firsthand that these people were faithful. They were doing what was right. They were following the Lord. They came back, and John got word of this wonderful thing. And listen to what he says. This is an apostle. This is the man who stood at the foot of the cross, and Jesus said, woman, behold thy son, and son, behold thy mother, and took the responsibility of the Lord's mother, of Mary, for the rest of her life, as long as she lived. He said, that's your responsibility. I'm leaving and I'm ascending to my Father, and I'm asking you to take the responsibility to take care